This is the Mazda CX-3, possibly one of the best looking small SUVs on sale. And it's one that you can buy right now with more than £1,000 off of its list price from whatcar.com. So click on the link in our description or on the pop-out banner somewhere at the top of the screen there to find out more. So the CX-3 is the smallest SUV that Mazda makes. That means in the lineup you've got the CX-3 at the bottom, you've got above that the very confusingly named CX-30, and then above them you have the CX-5 at the top of Mazda's SUV lineup. The CX-3 is actually based on the Mazda 2 hatchback, but it's been jacked up a little bit and obviously styled to look a bit different to turn it into this small SUV. Now, being a small SUV means that it has absolutely loads of rivals, and among them you've got cars like the Volkswagen T-Cross, Seat Arona, Citroen C3 Aircross, Skoda Kamiq, Kia Stonic, and there's probably dozens that are about to be released by other manufacturers as well, because it's a really popular part of the market. Now, the CX-3 was first launched in 2015 and it was a big sales hit. So when facelift time came around in 2018, Mazda didn't really see that it had to do too much with it. So for the facelift, really the only thing that changed was a slightly different front grille. Now, Mazda has just released this very fancy pants range-topping limited edition GT Sport Nav Plus model, and only 500 units are going to be made. And the way they stand out on the exterior is this bit of silver trim on the front and rear bumpers, and you also get a silver finish on the door mirrors.
But with only 500 being made, it's unlikely you'll be buying this exact model. So don't worry, we'll be talking about the entire CX-3 lineup, starting with the inside.
No matter what trim you go for, you get a nice, smartly designed interior in the CX-3. So to look at, it's a bit more exciting than the proficient but bland alternatives in the Volkswagen T-Cross and the Seat Arona. And also, the mix of materials used on the dash is really nice as well, especially in this range-topping model that we've got here. The materials do feel pretty plush and nice all round, and in the T-Cross and the Arona and rivals like that, they typically have a few harder plastics on their dashboard that just don't feel quite nice. However, we would say that ultimately the T-Cross and the Arona are screwed together a little bit better than the CX-3, but there's not much in it. This is still an impressive interior in terms of build quality. Now, the driving position is very good. There's loads of adjustability in the steering wheel and also in the seats. However, a word of warning, and this might sound like a bit of a nerdy point, but on the lower trim levels, you only get a manually adjustable backrest. And if you go for that, it's got a really frustratingly limited number of positions that you can put it in. But don't worry, because if you go for the higher spec levels, then you get fully electrically adjustable seats, so you can fine-tune your driving position to exactly how you want it, even if you do really want to put it this far forward and sit like that. And it's another good thing in here that these controls all fall easily to hand or in really easy reach from the driver, whereas rivals like the Citroen C3 Aircross, they've got their climate control systems hidden on this fiddly touchscreen that's just not that easy to use quickly. So it's great that Mazda's stuck with this. Similarly, this infotainment system is one of the best in the class, and let's explain why. You get this 7-inch screen on top of the dashboard here, and at low speeds or when you're parked up, you can use it as a touch screen. However, if you go above a certain miles an hour, then you can't use the touch screen because Mazda says it's too distracting, which you can't really argue with them. So, as an alternative, you've got this fantastic rotary dial down here, a bit like BMW's iDrive system. And this rotary dial lets you cycle through the menus, you've got some helpful shortcut buttons around it, and really, in terms of sheer usability, this is one of the best infotainment systems out there. Plus, it's backed up by decent graphics and it gets loads of features too, like DAB radio and Bluetooth. However, one slight negative is that Apple CarPlay and Android Auto are only able to come in the CX-3 if you fit them from a dealer after you've bought the car. So now that other rivals are offering that technology as standard across the lineup, it's a bit of a shame that the CX-3, you've got to pay extra for it.
So now you've had a look around inside, which do you think has the nicest interior? Is it the Mazda CX-3, Seat Arona, Citroen C3 Aircross, or the Kia Stonic? Let us know by voting in our poll.
Now, the CX-3 isn't the biggest small SUV on the market, but even if you're a tall driver, there's plenty of room up front. You get a good amount of headroom, and if you're a bit smaller, you can even lift the seat up to give you a better view as well. As for storage, you have door bins up front, which are a bit thin, but still big enough for a water bottle. And on the center console, you've got a cubby hole with some storage space here, with some interesting cup holder solutions. So you've got one cup holder at the front. You've also got this middle one, which you can open out, or keep recessed, and you can even take the whole cup holder out, fling it somewhere else to give you a bit more space in this storage compartment down here. In front of that, you've got a little tray here to put a smartphone while it's charging on one of these USB cables, and also a glove box, which is a decent size. Now, space in the back isn't quite so generous. There are 3 seats back here, but you'd only really be able to fit 2 adults in the back here comfortably. And when I say comfortably, maybe that's stretching the definition of the word a little bit, because you can see there really isn't much head and leg room, so you can't stretch out and relax in the back here that you can more so in a Captur and in the Arona as well. They offer better space for rear passengers, but you get Isofix mounts on the outer rear seats, and you can also pull this part of the middle seat down to give an armrest to these 2 rear passengers, and they have some more hidden cup holder fun as well. Now, every CX-3 gets a height adjustable boot floor, which is great. However, you can see on this model that when you lift up the top of the height adjustable boot floor, there isn't a great deal amount of storage space underneath it. The reason for that is, if you lift this up, you can see we've got the upgraded Bose sound system on this car, and the subwoofer in the back takes up the space where your shopping bags or luggage would probably be going. So this isn't necessarily the most practical version of the CX-3 to buy. However, it's still handy to have this height adjustable boot floor.
Drop this floor to its lowest setting and you get a deeper space that will take 5 carry-on size suitcases.
And another handy thing is, if you do fold down these rear seats back here with the boot floor in its highest setting, when they're folded, you can see that there isn't really an awkward step up from the boot to the rear seats. But what is the CX-3 like to buy and run? Well, it isn't a bargain. Compared to its rivals, the CX-3 is more expensive to buy, especially if you go for those higher spec models. However, Mazda expects most of its buyers to opt for a monthly PCP finance deal. But even then, the CX-3 will cost more each month than its rivals.
It will be cheaper to service than other alternatives though, and it'll hold on to its value well.
If you need low CO2 emissions and good fuel economy, then obviously the diesel will be the pick of the CX-3's lineup for you. However, if you're a private buyer, then we'd point you in the direction of the petrols. But just bear in mind that Mazda's petrols aren't as efficient as its rivals.
There are 3 main trims: SE Nav Plus, SEL Nav Plus and Sport Nav Plus. We'd go for mid-spec SEL Nav Plus, which gets climate control, heated seats and rear parking sensors, on top of the DAB radio, cruise control and infotainment you get with SE Nav Plus. It costs a bit extra to go for it, but we reckon it's worth it.
Mazda has a good reliability record, and as standard you get a 3-year 60,000 mile warranty, which might not stand out but does match most of its rivals. The CX-3 has a decent amount of safety equipment on offer, but it's a shame it isn't all standard across the board. SEL Nav Plus and Sport Nav Plus both get automatic emergency braking and lane departure warning. Plus, there's a safety pack option which adds blind spot monitoring, rear cross traffic alert and high beam assist. It's reasonably priced, but only available on top spec models with a petrol engine. The CX-3 is available with 3 engines. Now that is 2 petrols and 1 diesel. The petrols are called skyactiv-d, and you have a choice of 119 brake horsepower or 148 brake horsepower. We're in the 119 brake horsepower version, and it is definitely the pick of the range. 0 to 62 miles per hour is done in a respectable rather than rapid 9 seconds dead. Now, while that is impressive compared to similarly powered rivals in the class, the pace on offer in the CX-3 isn't effortless. The reason for that is its rivals are turbocharged, but this Mazda unit is naturally aspirated, and in fact all the petrol Mazda units are naturally aspirated. So what that means is when the revs drop below about 2,500 RPM, it feels pretty flat and fairly sluggish as well. So if you really want to get the best performance out of this engine, it means that you've got to keep the revs up, keep them high in the range, and it does mean that you'll have to be fairly regularly shifting through the gears to get the best out of it. However, that isn't such a bad thing, because this 6-speed manual gearbox is really precise and slick. It's definitely among the best that you'll find in the small SUV class. And also the power delivery is very smooth and linear throughout the entire rev range, so it is actually quite a nice engine to rev out all the way to the red line. The 148 brake horsepower engine is only available with 4-wheel drive, and so it's much more expensive than this engine with 2-wheel drive. And because it's heavier, it isn't actually that much quicker.
The diesel is called skyactiv-d and it's a 1.8 litre engine with 114 brake horsepower, which needs to be worked quite hard and only gives its best from higher revs, which is uncharacteristic for a diesel.
The CX-3 is firmer riding than rivals like the C3 Aircross, which is much softer. But the upshot of that is that it feels well tied down and it's composed over undulating roads. Plus, if you go over potholes or sharp imperfections like expansion joints, then it manages to go over it without too much crashing and bashing. So it's pretty good, although an Arona is ultimately a more comfortable car. The upshot of that firmer suspension in the CX-3 though is that when you go around a corner, body roll is kept to a minimum. But it's just a shame that this steering isn't a bit better at higher speeds. So it's fine around town where it's nice and light, so going into a parking space or doing a 3-point turn is really easy. But when you're going a bit quicker, it's not quite so good around the straight ahead. It feels a bit sticky. So what I mean by that is when you wind some lock on an Arona, it will come back to the middle pretty definitively and gives the steering a nice kind of fluid feel to it. But in the CX-3, it doesn't do it quite so slickly. So that's why it just feels a bit kind of sticky and not quite so accurate. But that's only really something that is going to frustrate you if you're absolutely hooning it around some B roads and threading some difficult corners together. So on the motorway or just around town, as we were saying, it's not going to be such an issue. But ultimately, to drive quickly, a Kia Stonic and a Seat Arona are more satisfying.
Plus, if you want a relaxing cruiser, then the CX-3 doesn't really fit the bill either. The engines are pretty noisy, and at high speed there's a fair bit of wind, road and suspension noise to contend with, enough to get annoying during long journeys over course roads.
So the CX-3 looks good, is well equipped, has a great infotainment system and a composed ride, but its engine lineup feels a bit off the pace compared to its turbocharged rivals, both in terms of performance and emissions. Space in the back also isn't great, and it's expensive to buy. So if you do want to buy one, make sure that you go to whatcar.com to save yourself some money. And of course, before you do anything, make sure that you're subscribed to our YouTube channel with the notifications turned on, because honestly, we have loads of videos that come out every single week. So if you want to be the first to know about them and the first to watch them, make sure that you're subscribed.